Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, Elon Musk does say some interesting things from time to time. Stacy.
Right. Well, as we know, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, at least this week. And also this week, the masters of the universe of this fiat world are meeting up in Scotland to determine how to command and control the Earth's climate. These are the same people who, by and large, also try to command and control the world's monetary system, the economic system, the geoeconomics, geopolitics, all the system they control. So as they're meeting, I want to point out to, the COP meeting, COP26, is run by the UN. The UN World Food Program was also in the news this week with something they tweeted about Elon Musk. And they said 2% of Elon Musk's wealth could solve world hunger, says director of UN Food Scarcity Organization. To this, a guy named Dr. Eli David tweeted, fact check, 2% of Elon Musk's wealth is $6 billion. In 2020, the UN World Food Program raised $8.4 billion. How come? It didn't solve world hunger with $8.4 billion.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. First of all, let me say this and explain something here. The reason for money printing and lower rates for 30 years was to stimulate growth, was to increase demand, was to satisfy Keynesian doctrine. And we've been saying on this show for more than 10 years that all the money printing actually stimulates deflation. All the money printing stimulates economic malaise. All the money printing is why there's so many financial crises. And now the central banks around the world realize that that's true. Max and Stacy were correct. It's undeniable that the money printing actually caused all these problems with growth, GDP, wealth and income gaps. So they had to come up with a new narrative. And the narrative this year is climate change. Climate change is being swapped out for we need growth. And it's being used to justify money printing. And just like printing money doesn't create growth, printing money doesn't solve climate change either. You cannot substitute the price signals and workings of free markets with the command and control Politburo of global central bankers who think they know better than the market. Every single time that's been tried, not only of our own species, but over all species, over all time. When you try to question reality, you always lose. Reality always wins in the end. So Elon Musk there, 3% or 2% of his net worth is roughly equivalent to what they suggest is needed to solve hunger. Okay, another rationalization for money printing that is by definition impossible to work through money printing. And Elon Musk made a very cogent remark.
He tweeted in response, if WFP, World Food Program, can describe on this Twitter thread exactly how $6 billion will solve world hunger, I will sell Tesla stock right now and do it. So, to me, this is kind of like he's called their bluff, right? And their bluff is the law of big numbers. We have the law of big numbers coming from the top down, and we have the law of small numbers that kind of trick all these ordinary Joe Bag of Donuts with their free stimulus checks to go into like the Robinhood apps and trade a micro share, right? You could buy $1 worth of Apple stock, for example, because the number's too big, but you can buy $1 and prop up their whole system. Well, here, how these agencies kind of get consensus for their continued rule is the law of big numbers. It's like $6 billion, and we could solve world food hunger. And at the same time, part of the reason why we have food hunger is because of so much money printing, driving up the cost of the food prices. So food prices are going up because of all the money printing, just like they did after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Food prices went up because of all the money printing and their system that they command and control, the economic collapse, the boom and bust cycle that they keep on pumping and pumping and pumping. Now we have a similar thing of a collapse in supply because of the same system these guys say that they are command and controlling.
Right. There's an old rule in magic performing. And people know that I used to be a magician when I was a teenager. And it's a big move hides a small move. So if you're doing something with your hands, leisure germane, if you're moving your hands in a big move, this way, while you are doing your smaller machination, it hides the smaller move. So by saying these big numbers, 6 billion, 12 billion, 100 billion, it's a way to hide what's happening really on the ground, what's happening in those private conversations and those private deals in the back rooms.
They have these giant meetings with all these heads of state, except for China and Russia not attending. 30% of the world's emissions, carbon emissions, right? Mostly from China. So they're not attending, but they're having this big, like these giant moves and these big facial expressions. Of course, why all those magicians make these grand hand movements and big face gestures. So while they're doing this of like, we're going to cure the problems that we caused for the past 100 years of money printing, of industrialization, of globalization, all the stuff that we've caused, right? Some of it good, some of it bad. But here, on the other hand, in the small print, look over at what this financial reporter from Germany is reporting. Good morning from Germany, where the financial repression intensifies. Real yields, 10-year bunds minus inflation, plunged to negative 4.61%, a fresh all-time low after inflation jumped to 4.5% in October from 4.1% in September. Real yields now negative for 66 consecutive months, another historical record. Here's like causing climate change with, on one hand, causing hyperconsumption, causing pulling more and more of the future into the now for their own personal gain. That's what's really happening. And, turn off the money spigots. Maybe that will stop. Do more the meeting in person in Glasgow to determine how to get other people to stop the consequences of your own actions.
Right. No, I think it's a good point. Combining or putting together both what's happening in that COP meeting in Scotland for climate change and what's happening in Germany with the largest now negative real yields ever on record. Because the bond market, which is a $200 trillion market, it's could be the biggest market in the world. It's a global market dominated by sovereign debts, dominated by central banks that are all colluding and working together. The message is clear. Either you continue to buy these negative yielding bonds and lock in a loss, or we're going to make them even more negative. And you can do that by coercion. You can do that with a gulag established by globalists who are effectively putting people in financial prison, or what I call financial apartheid. This is a transgression of human rights. These types of negative yields it's a human rights violation, and the people in Germany are right to reject it. Anyone who is a fighter for human rights would reject these types of real negative yields because they're completely voluntarily being put into place by sadists.
It's, as we've discussed, it means time has no value. They're taking more and more of destroying time, destroying the future hopes, and yet they're saying they're meeting in order to make sure the future we could survive in the future. And yet their own actions are showing that they themselves don't have any sort of consideration for the future. And also, by the way, like as we mentioned recently, Joe Biden himself is, the leader of the free world. The U.S. is the leading, power of the UN, I would say. And then they're the ones that were like our consumers, even though we've flooded them with free money over the past year or two, lots of all these PPP sort of programs and free money everywhere. We need Saudi Arabia to pump more oil for our own economy so our consumers can consume more. And do this next tweet here, unofficially for the month, the S&P 500 gains 6.9%, the Dow climbs 5.8%, the NASDAQ adds 7.3%. So that's what they want, permanent, like parabolic moves up. And we need parabolic moves up now. And we need negative interest rates because we have so much debt. And the debt causes us to have to hyper consume in order to keep current. Remember the Red Queen syndrome, you have to run faster and faster just to stay in the same place. And that in terms of the economy, that means consume more and more faster and faster to stay in the same place.
Right. So to save the ecology, to cure climate change, the single greatest action that anyone could take in the world today would be to allow interest rates globally to achieve a normal market-driven rate of 5%, which would immediately bankrupt all the bad actors and all the consumer product companies that are flooding the world with stuff that's just jamming up landfills, jamming up the ports, and benefiting and awarding to bad actors. That's the single greatest thing that can be done. The second thing that can be done, that is being done, is that $200 trillion bond market is bleeding into Bitcoin market. So as Bitcoin goes to 100, 200, $1 million a coin and steals from the bond market, interest rates will go to 5, 6, 7% because people are going to be dumping their bonds for Bitcoin. And that will save the climate. That's the only hope we have as a species to survive the next 50 years.
Yeah, the negative rates is causing a misallocation of capital, which is caused. So, for example, the S&P 500 is up 7%. The S&P 500 is $40 trillion at the end of August 31st, 2021. The entire market cap was worth $40.1 trillion. So you're up 7% in 1 month. That's $4 trillion right there. That's created, and thus more capital for them to consume more. Like, it's just it's a loop of bad ideas and bad investment, and it's rewarding. It continues to reward all of those bad ideas and bad companies, the way the system is set up at the moment.
Right. They say the supply chains are broken and container ships are backed up at the ports. That's because they printed all this money that stimulated demand for a lot of stuff in China that's being shipped to America that's jammed up at the ports. So the supply chain disruption is caused by money printing. That is the root cause of all of this. And the only way to solve it is through raising rates. But since no one's going to do it, then there's Bitcoin that'll bleed money from the bond market and force their interest rate increase. And if you're not prepared, you're going to be extremely out of luck.
Well, that's the other thing, is that we're supposed to believe that we can rely on these institutions to solve the crisis of the climate. And yet they can't even solve the crisis of getting a face mask manufactured in America, or a plastic toy delivered in time for Christmas from China. This is all logistics. It's basic logistics, and they can't do it. The ports in Long Beach stopped, at a standstill because of logistics, because we can't even do that. So how are we supposed to believe? We'll see it when we believe it. Elon Musk is calling them on their sort of mentality of like, oh, it's an easy fix. We just need $6 billion, right? Okay, show me the money. Here's the money. Show me your actions. The same thing we have to do with these people who think they can command and control their way out of this disaster they caused.
I'm on board. Hey, we're going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Ben Aris. He's the editor of BNE.eu. It's business news from Eastern Europe, Eurasia, the Middle East, Africa. Always a pleasure to have Ben on the show. Ben, welcome back.
Good to see you, Max. Nice to catch up.
All righty. So the natural gas crisis in Europe, let's talk about that. Everyone has an opinion or an accusation on who's to blame, what's going on. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's there's been a perfect storm, and everybody's been accusing Russia of cutting the gas in order to use it as a weapon against specifically Ukraine, but the EU in general. However, most of what's happened with the spike in prices can be put down to market forces. And it's kind of complicated. I mean, to unpack it, in 2020, there was a very warm winter, and at the same time, Russia was in an argument with Ukraine over gas transit, and so built up massive storage. And the prices plummeted as a result of that. But then the following year, in 2021, that winter, was extremely cold, and it went on into the spring. And so everybody used up their gas and then suddenly realized they hadn't got enough in storage. So then by the time they got to the summer, everyone could see that they were going to be short of gas this winter, and prices went through the roof. And this was made worse because the EU has dropped using long-term contracts and went over to a spot market a few years ago. And so suddenly there was no gas, and the prices are not capped, and nobody's got long-term deals with Gazprom. And so the prices went from around 200 bucks per 1,000 cubic meter up to 2,000 in the space of a few months. Now, they've recently dropped off again because Gazprom has started delivering again. But to add to this storm, you had the LNG, because everyone's built a whole bunch of terminals around Europe, and that was supposed to be the swing supply. So if you weren't getting enough gas from Russia, you could buy LNG that's coming from Qatar, that's coming now from the States. But the Asian market is having an even worse gas crisis than Europe. And so all of the LNG has disappeared off to Asia, leaving nothing for Europe. So that just added to it. And the final piece in the puzzle is that Europe's own gas production has been plummeting. The really big field in Holland has been causing earthquakes, so empty. And so they've been, it's been closed down. And all these things came together and combined at the same time to cause this gas crisis, which everyone's turned around and just said, oh, it's Gazprom cutting off the gas in order to, do deals with Europe.
Right. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on there. You've got the inability of the EU to lock in long-term gas contracts. Instead, they're now exposed to the spot market. And just like everything else in the world, we've got a problem with inflation. So all commodities are going up in price, more or less. So that's no exception for gas. Now, what's interesting, Ben, is that the way I see this, we're setting up an interesting duality, an interesting approach taken by two different countries. You've got everybody who's under the fiat money standard versus Russia, that's under essentially a hard money standard. Russia's been paying down all their debt. They've got a very low debt to GDP. They've been buying a lot of gold. And, they're prepared now for what could be a secular move in inflation. The prices are going to go up across the board. But they prepared for this. So why should they be penalized? They're like the little piggy that lives in the brick house. The EU is living in the straw house, and America is living in no house at all. They're homeless. So what, you know what I'm saying? Like they made the right choice. So they should reap the benefit, Ben.
Yeah, no, Russia's been extremely conservative. I mean, the debt has fallen down to around 15% of GDP. Russia has enough money to pay off its entire external debt and the public debt and still have $100 billion left over in cash, which is enough to ensure the stability of the ruble. And moreover, they've just been making the new budget, and Putin has elected to actually increase the reserves. They already have more than 2 years hard currency reserves to cover imports. And they're afraid. I mean, look, you have to imagine this country's been through multiple crises since 1991. I mean, I've lived through 8 major crises myself. And that has given them a certain paranoia. That has given them the sense that they need to, first and foremost, make sure that the country is stable and that they can deal with any of these shocks. And each shock that comes does progressively less damage. I mean, the central bank is battle hardened, and with the currency, again, they trying to stop it appreciating. It's got much stronger recently, which suppresses the exports. But most of the exports are raw materials, and those things are not affected so much by the inflation. I mean, they'll be sold anyway. And another factor going into this gas crisis, and I think this is a point that most people have missed, is that the advent of LNG has changed the whole gas business into a classic commodity business. Because in the old days, you had a pipeline, but there's no market there. You have the producer who puts gas in at one end, and you have the buyer that takes it out the other end, and there's only one person. So the prices were fixed and tied into these long-term contracts. But now all the LNG has disappeared to Asia because you can move it on a ship. You created a commodity market, and that's one of the reasons that the gas prices have gone shooting up. And this is simply poor planning on the part of the European Union, because they assumed that the supplies on the spot market would be there, that the LNG would be available as a swing commodity or swing supply to come in when there was a shortage like there was this year. And of course, it's all disappeared off to Asia, and that's left no one with any supply, and the prices have gone through the roof. And it highlights the rush that there's been in the EU to get into renewables. But at the same time, they've closed down their coal power stations, they've closed down their nuclear power stations, the things they need in order to provide the base load, when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. And they've come a cropper. And now Gazprom is in this sort of do or die position where it needs to sign new long-term contracts because these pipelines and fields it's developing cost tens of billions of dollars. And the EU has been reluctant. But you should also notice that this crisis is very much a Northern European crisis. The people who are suffering are Germany, Poland. Whereas all the Southern European states like Turkey, Moldova, Hungary, they've all happily signed these long-term deals. And so they have this cheap gas guaranteed to come.
Right. Yeah. The liquid natural gas, LNG, has changed the market, as you point out. The U.S. is a major producer of natural gas, and as you point out, they're selling to Asia. Asia pays more. They're not selling to Europe. So once again, why blame Russia? The U.S. could have easily sold it to the EU. I mean, it's a market out there. It's a free market, and whoever pays the most is going to get the gas. So again, it just seems like a damp squib when trying to characterize this as a geopolitical games. It's just the market working its magic.
Specifically on that point, I mean, the Gazprom has been accused of cutting off supplies, of undersupplying Europe. But Gazprom had the end of 99, it signed a new transit deal with Ukraine. And it's scrupulously been meeting all its obligations. And there's this assumption that for some reason Gazprom should be, nice to Europe and supply extra gas on top of its contracted obligations, which it actually has been doing. It's increased by 15%. But Gazprom only supplies 30% of Europe's gas. 70% come from the other suppliers in Norway and the LNG. And the Americans specifically, if they wanted to be nice to their allies in Europe who are having this crisis, should divert some of the LNG to the European market. But they're not doing that because, they're market players. They're going where the prices are highest, and, Europe and its problems because, we need to make a profit. And so 70% of the gas, which is supplied from other people, simply not coming. No one's being nice to them. And Gazprom is in the position where it could make more money if it sold more. But another aspect of this crisis is that Russia is suffering from exactly the same supply crunch as Europe, in so much as it's also, because of the weather, like I explained, it's also rushing to fill its own tanks before the winter. Because, in Russia, it gets really cold in the winter and it needs enough gas to heat the population. And that process of filling the tanks only came to an end today. Today was the day that Gazprom announced that they filled the tanks. And so now they have a little bit more capacity to divert to Europe. And the prices instantly fell from $2,000 to, I think they're $800 per thousand today, which is the market mechanism. So if you look at it, yes, there is some politics going on here. Gazprom is not being totally helpful, but at the same time, it's very focused on the need to sign these contracts, these long-term contracts. And the analogy I always give is that if you have a contract with your mobile data provider and you run out of mobile data, 2 days before the end of the month, and it's your mum's birthday, you want to ring her, good luck persuading your mobile data provider to give you an extra couple of gigabytes in order for you to be able to do that. They're just going to insist you sign a new contract at a higher tariff and lock you in for 2 years. And it's the market. We taught the Russians how to do that, and that's what they're doing.
Next question. So not to oversimplify things, but Nord Stream 2, the pipeline from Russia to Europe, simply bypasses Ukraine essentially. So it avoids that geopolitical landmine. But is it on? Have they turned it on, or is it still not being turned on? And wouldn't one of the solutions to this be to simply turn it on? Ben?
They could. If they turned it on, then this gas crisis would be over. And it's filled with technical gas, and it could literally be turned, if the order was given today, it would literally turn on tomorrow. But again, the Nord Stream 2 thing has become highly politicized. And again, everybody focused on the fact that it bypasses Ukraine. But you have to understand the structure of the Russian gas business a bit more in more detail, in so much as these pipelines connect to specific fields. And the pipeline that runs through Ukraine is connected to the oldest and almost depleted fields in Western Siberia called the MPT fields. And those ones are already working at full capacity. And the Nord Stream 2 pipeline connects to the new fields in the Arctic called Yamal. But those, you can't take easily gas from Yamal and send it across to the central route that goes through Ukraine, because there aren't many interconnectors. And those interconnectors are being fully used in order to supply the domestic tanks. Like I said, the Russia have to prepare for the winter season too. So it's actually not so straightforward. And those pipes in that Western Siberian field that feed Ukraine are due to be decommissioned. So there's actually they've been over a barrel.
All right, listen, let's take this to a segment 2, but thanks for being on this portion of Keiser Report, Ben. All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Ben Aris of BNE.eu. Until next time, bye, y'all.